Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So for those of you who haven't heard about 3IE, it's the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, and it's committed to increase the use of rigorous evidence to improve policy in low and middle income countries by promoting and financing policy-relevant rigorous impact evaluation. Out of our program, one of our programs is dedicated to the production of what we call systematic reviews. And you might wonder, what are those? Systematic reviews, they examine the existing evidence on a particular intervention. Now, how does that differ from other types of reviews? Systematic reviews aim to provide unbiased assessment, as far as possible, of what works and why, through systematic identification of relevant studies and synthesis, both of quantitative and qualitative evidence. And the methodology is very requiring in the sense that it requires you to set out a study protocol ex ante with both study inclusion criteria, methods of search, appraisal methodologies, etc. And it also requires this to be done by numerous reviewers to minimize the bias of one reviewer. 3IE and in collaboration with both DFID and Australian Aid have been promoting and financing systematic reviews over the last 2 years. One of the very recent systematic reviews that was actually done in-house by our 3IE staff has come out with some preliminary findings, and it's a systematic review on the impact of farmer field schools. Now, as you know, farmer field schools is an increasingly popular type of agricultural extension and advisory services program, and one of its key components is also that farmers are encouraged to promote and share the information with their neighbors, their pals, and that is an integral part of the program. Now, what did the systematic review find? And just to mention that in terms of the amount of studies that finally were included that were of high enough quality, there were 13 studies covering 17 programs in various developing regions. It found that adoption of practices and impact, and also impact on agricultural yield, it found a significant positive impact on average across all the studies. However, very interestingly, rates of adoption and impacts on agricultural outcomes among the exposed farmers, i.e. those who were not directly trained but who were close and in proximity, that impact was limited. And the implication of this is serious because the diffusion is key for the sustainability and the cost effectiveness of the programs. And the other interesting finding was that impacts on welfare, nutrition, and health had not been examined. So an opportunity lost. Another interesting systematic review that is about to be published was done by IDS in the UK with Eduardo Masset and Lawrence Haddad, among other authors, is looking at impact of interventions to increase agricultural production on children's nutritional status. Now, what they found was that agricultural interventions considered had a positive impact on households' incomes and the consumption of specific foods promoted. They found very weak evidence of an impact on the absorption of micronutrients and on prevalence rates of stunting, wasting, and underweight in the -5-year-olds. Now, this was an update as opposed to previous reviews on the same topic. And it was a more rigorous way of looking at the evidence. And the conclusion, however, was that the absence of nutritional impact could be the result of poor methodological design of the studies rather than necessarily of program inefficacy. Now, I hope you see the cartoon, and if not, I'll try to describe it to you. But 3IE, I think this is how we see ourselves. This is one of our biggest roles, is to point out that we don't want to only have a program and then to see the outcome at the other end. We want to understand the causal chain, map out the causal chain of programs. And for those who don't see the cartoon, it's somebody pointing at the blackboard where in the middle it says the miracle, and then the miracle occurs. And we want to sort of map that out. What is that miracle? We try to do that in preparation for this conference. What are the causal chains between agriculture and health and nutrition? And of course, as you will know, this is, you know better than me, this is very complicated to map out. It should probably take a huge map. This is what we came up with. It's still quite big. Of course, each of these causal chains is, again, probably has at least 10 sub-assumptions. And each one of you, a specialist in some area, will know about them. I'm not going to take you through this because of the 10 minutes, just to tell you that what you see on the left-hand side is sort of the inputs, the different type of agricultural interventions, such as infrastructure investments, agricultural technology, agricultural extension, information, credit and grants, input supplies, etc. All of this is what you find on the left-hand side. And then as you go through this diagram towards the right, you come through, you go to intermediate outcomes and then towards final outcomes. So in the intermediate outcomes, you have knowledge acquisition, assets acquisition, you then get adoption of new technologies, etc. You come towards the middle, you are in increased productivity, and then you move towards the end of the diagram, you get into expenditures in health and nutrition, and then some impacts on health and nutrition. Of course, there are many backlinkages here. For example, the increase in production may actually have also negative effects on health, etc. But we can come back to that in future discussions afterwards. Now, did we do this mapping out? Because we wanted to know, well, what do we know along this causal chain? So we created what I call the gap map. We first looked at our 3IE, DFID, and AusAid, either financed or to-be-financed studies. And we mapped, basically what you see here is just a table format of the diagram on the previous slide. So going from left to right, you go from the inputs, the different interventions, and then towards intermediate and final outcomes. And what we find that in terms of systematic reviews, there are quite a few that will be produced in the near future. And basically around agricultural technology, there are several around credit and grants. And as I mentioned, there is perhaps only one of these that currently was looking at the impact on nutritional status. And as I told you already, one of the findings of that was that, in fact, the studies that they included were perhaps not good enough to really pick up properly those impacts. So there's still an indication for future for the need for future primary studies. And the gray zones are all showing areas where there currently is very little systematic reviews done. And systematic reviews basically are usually done where there is some sort of evidence. So this also tells you where there is evidence and where there is possibly a gap. And just if you see, there's one area as well. The health status is something that there's very little evidence on, and also on land tenure systems. And I'm talking here of evidence seen from the point of view of agricultural interventions. And then finally, again, a gap map, but looking at what we are financing in terms of primary research, not systematic reviews. The pink dots are showing actually different areas where we are. Where we are financing primary research in various regions, and you can see two of the next speakers. I've highlighted their studies, as they are financed in part by 3IE. There's Kickstart, which is around agricultural technology, and which is one of the few that is looking at a number of outcomes, not only on productivity and income, but also all the way through to nutrition and health. And there's the other one that we'll see later that is on biofortification, and I call it sweet potatoes, so we hear more about it. And again, is actually looking at these at impacts all the way through to nutritional health status. But they are the exception. And you can see that we are financing some other studies, and there is possibility and maybe room for even, for future, to basically get these researchers perhaps to expand their research to look to these final outcomes. So there are some possibilities. Thank you.